Disclaimer: the information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of Gans processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
Well, congratulations, everybody. We are here. And as we rocket into the new year, this is the KAKT American Knowledge Team meeting of 2026. And we're still talking about the same things we've been talking about for well over a decade. It's the World Peace Treaty. We need to bring it on. I mean, it's long overdue, isn't it? We keep doing the same things and expecting different results. It's kind of strange, but that's just the way human nature is, because we've been conditioned to that, and we've accepted that. We've accepted that because we are not worthy. Well, surprise. You can't be more equal. Equal is equal. KAKT Foundation Spaceship Institute is bringing you the plasma science. We're discussing advanced Gans tech. Today's session is solid Gans. My name is Alexander. I'm from Canada. It is January the 4th of 2026. And this is part of the KAKT Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. So as we turn another chapter in this ongoing series, we see that we're heading into our 6th year of doing these public teachings. We try to distill them into bite-sized pieces, but it's getting to be like a Chinese buffet, 100 meals, and you can only handle one. But the reason is because we have to move ahead. As students, we become teachers, and new students come on, and they too will become teachers. So we need to arm ourselves with the knowledge so that we can convey it in our own way. And that's what's important, our own way. Stay within your own means, stay within your own knowledge, and be open to the possibilities to expand that knowledge here, because we are beyond Beijing, May the 10th of 2025, because the 2025 gold rush has begun. And we have always been discussing the books of Marin Tabakoli Kesh, such as book number 1, The Universal Order of the Creation of Matter. And that's the bringing together of matter, antimatter, and dark matter. And then book number 2, if you're bringing this together and where you're bringing it, you need to understand the structure of the light. So there's a source, there's a destination, and there's an in-between. And we seem to be that in-between passenger, because in order to be a passenger, you have to have a vehicle. So in book number 3, we're talking about the origin of the universe, which creates all of these vehicles. So we see the one splits up into the duality, the singularity splits up into the duality of the sister universe with man's universe. But in that realm, we only have our little tiny perfect world we call Earth. And then on Earth, we have an even tiny, tiny perfect world going on. So we deride the cavemen for being ignorant. And as many of us decide to move into condominiums, we have literally moved into modern day caves. And that's unfortunate. It's a fallacy because we don't want to get involved. We don't want to accept responsibility. Well, we have to accept responsibility because this is our domicile. And for 411 weeks, the One Planet, One Nation, One Race for Justice and World Peace, brought to you by Rick Crabbin and the members of the Universal Council, I've been trying to bring forward the concept, the notion that we are all one part of humanity race, and that this Earth space is our place. And we all stay here as if there is no other place, but there is, and there is no other race, which is patently false, has been proven many, many times. In many cases, the corroboration and proof of that has been classified, and we know that. So we don't have any access to classified information, and we don't have access to advanced research. But it's patently obvious we were born. Where did we come from? And how did we get here? And why did we get here? Mathematically speaking, because of the angular density. They say we are falling through weakness, but that's not true. We are falling through increased density, increased pressure, increased gravity. Overall, that's the increased dependence on Earth space feeding. So, as being represented as falling angels, but it's contrary to the internal pressure of the Gans fields. And these are manifest in our auras. And our auras convey that energy that is manifest in our angular density, but angular momentum is conserved. And so where is that conserved? And so when we look at the stars out in the sky, we see that they're very, shall we say, weak compared to our sun. And our sun is a star. But we have in our Gans technology created tetrahedral stars, not understanding that these are overlapping fields of spherical stars. So when we look at our sun star and its manifestation, our sun as a star, and we look at the other suns, they're stars in the night sky. So we say, well, these are all fallen angels as a fallen star. But in reality, we are arrived angels as arrived sun stars. And this is becoming more and more apparent because there's a fallacy in understanding, and it comes about with the understanding of the plasma rule. From a society where the higher strength beats up the weaker strength, the plasma rule says the higher strength feeds the weaker strength. Either case, this becomes a transaction zone. So the point of view is to understand, is this a point of conflict or is this a point of binding? Well, it is a point of binding regardless, whether it's a conflict zone or a binding zone, because the conflict zone brings two forces together in a binding ideology of conflict, warmongering. And so that's what binds us together. And we create an inertia density manifestation of that psychology. And it's all based on, well, we need our commandments, don't we? Because we don't know, we're not smart enough. Someone has to tell us these are how to live. And they give us 10 commandments, but we're shortchanged. There's another 14, as we found out. And number 11, thou shalt not lie. Well, that was the first broken commandment. And it allows us to continue in our delinquent ways. And so we share that. We share that understanding because energy binding is a self-serving dimension point, and it's fundamental, it's necessary. No one cares for you more than me, myself, and I. And we go to the extent where we do this at the expense of others who also have that binding point of me, myself, and I. So how do you rationalize that? If you're stealing from somebody, you're either doing it through deception, through lies, through cheating, stealing, killing. You're depriving others of that energy binding need for the fulfillment of the self-serving dimension point. So what do? They retaliate, they attack, they seek revenge, or they pass it on. Let's do the domino effect. You rob from me, I rob from the next one, let the next one rob from the other. And this is all based on the falseness of the old physics, which we see where the speed of light is the maximum speed. But when we look at that maximum speed and we see that the light is traveling in all different directions and there is a cohesiveness, that cohesiveness has to go beyond the speed of light. So that notion is false. And so in order to change direction, we have to shift our polarity. So we're doing that all the time, thousands of times every second, every day. But we say that the polar shift causes ice ages and tsunamis. That's another false physical stance. And in fact, the old science says it's not possible to regrow limbs, but salamanders can. It's not possible to change skin color, but chameleons can. And it's not possible to change one's nature, but butterflies can. So the plasma science says, well, if you're going to do that, if you're going to think that, then it's obviously not possible for you. But for the plasma science group, we need to restate and add that principal matter consists of the PM ticks, which are magnetical, and they're traveling all through the universe as an energy pack. And they diverge. And when they come together through the force field dilution, you create antimatter, dark matter, and matter gen. Why? Because there's a common denominator, and you create this plasma gen conversion, and it remains in the plasmatic state until it has a destination, until it has an environment to come to, which also becomes a gravitational magrav with the convergence of energy. And so that destination and our plasmagen fields interact in the cup of inertia. That's a field interaction between two other fields. That's the inertia. So now we understand the basics. So what we're doing is seeking magrav pathways. So each magrav has a gravitational intensity, which is attraction. In order to do that attraction, it has to feed back. And from that feedback, we have the magnetical outintensity, which is repulsion. And that, what you repel, becomes the feeding for something else. And so we look at the relationship of the electron, and then we look at the relationship of the neutron, and we know which one's bigger. And I'm sure you can tell. And that's where the anomaly comes in, because all things are relevant. And they're related to something else. So in our discussion of matter plasma dimensions, we just boil it down to the gravitational part is the physical, which you can touch and see, and the plasmatic magnetical, you cannot touch and cannot see. But this part of the plasmatic reality is the completion of the matter plasma dimension. And the matter plasma dimension is part of the feedback. And so when you say, well, what you see is what you get, that's part of our feedback. But how about what you see is what you create? And that is also part of the feedback. So we have to understand that there are counterweights that we have to measure. And so if we are feedback dominant, that is our physical state. And for that physical state, we apply a weight, such as underweight, overweight, or how heavy is it? But in the atomic state, we are still measuring, but by mass. That's how we differentiate all the different atoms. And so we apply a mass to these atoms, and the way the mass increases is by increasing the number of atoms. So this is the gravitational part of the counterweight measure, but then we get into the nuclear state, we measure that with Teslas. And we have achieved 129 Tesla, which is 129 times the magnetical field strength of our planet Earth. And this is still being downplayed as some kind of false science, even though what you see is what you get. And then we have the anomaly of time. How does that fit? So we find that that is the plasma state. So the nuclear state and the plasma state are part of the magnetical counterweight. And so the counterweight measures is how everything works because it keeps it in balance. It keeps it in equilibrium. So this is where the plasma matter dilemma comes in because we are talking about advanced Gans tech here, which is coming from the atomic state into the nano state into the Gans state. And in order to balance these equations, the one side has to equal the other side, and each side has to have a magnetical gravitational relationship. And then we come to the plasma state, and it has a non-tangible relationship. And then we are able to transcend the various levels with this maggrav energy transfer state. So when we have the equilibrium, you don't just look at the plasma state or the Gans state. You can actually cross over state lines. People do that in the US all the time. But what we're looking at is the advanced science surrounding carbon-14. And man space has to have a different point of view. From our point of view, the matter state is a dilution of emotions. The emotion of man, the emotion of physicality, the emotion of presence, the emotion of position, and the emotion of vision. But the soul space point of view involves the emotion of knowledge. We all think we understand love because love is simply irresistible. And we know that it's an emotion. But it has greater meaning, far more intense, because it allows us to transcend the various highways of our journey. We're used to the transmission highway of the carbon-12, but now we've introduced the transition highway of carbon-14. And that is just a midpoint to get us to the transmutation highway of carbon-16. And is that the ceiling? Is that the upper limit? Or can we go further than that? Well, let's reinforce the foundations of our knowledge to understand that ray motion is part of creation. And there's two types of creation. There's the creation part of creation, but it is counterweighted by natural decay. And then there's the decay part of creation, which is counterweighted by natural creation. And then these two are balanced through a bonding factor. That's the transaction zone between the natural creation and the natural decay. But it goes in various dimensions. And it has to cross these boundaries. And again, we don't take that into account because out of sight, out of mind, don't see it, we don't have to explain it. So we just fudge that knowledge and say, well, you know, it is what it is. Well, it is what it is. So when we look at the carbon inertia highways, we understand that the atomic structure is in the physical state, but we have isotopes of carbon-14 and carbon-16, and we have to understand that the counterweight to that is not visible to us. And that invisible counterweight also has a counterweight, and that's invisible to us. So whichever relationship that you want to pick becomes a turning point from one side of the counterweight to the other side of the counterweight. So we have multiple turning points in terms of our understanding of the equilibrium of the universe. So understanding that point, now we introduce the plasma space point of view. And isn't that interesting? It involves the dilution of the emotions, the same thing. The emotion of man, the emotion of physicality, the emotion of presence, the emotion of position, and the emotion of vision. How is that possible for the plasma space point of view to reflect the same point of view as the man space? Well, the common denominator is the soul space point of view, which involves the emotion of knowledge and the emotion of love. And it still is simply irresistible. So this is where our problem sits. This vitality comes in the form of a loosh. And so we talk about the energy binding at the expense of others. That is the stealing of loosh. But we enhance that by actually being a loosh leaker. We need to stop leaking. We need to enlist the services of the energy fields that are given to us. We need a boost. We need a vitality enhancement to enhance our emotional structure and our physical structure. Did you want regular, or would super be good today? And why not? Because you were born with all the vitality that you needed. Somewhere along the way, we lost it. It was either stolen from us or we just plain leaked. So to understand these energies, we look at sunflowers and see the overlapping fields. We're going to discuss that a lot because the singularity of each field is the magnetical gravitational relationship. But when you look at the sunflower, it has many different fields. So the singularity of that field comes from the duality of the maggrav of the inertia field, which is to say that one part of the maggrav inertia field is a magnetical gravitational relationship. The other part of the maggrav inertia field is a magnetical gravitational relationship. And the combination of two create the maggrav of the inertial field of the magnetical gravitational relationship. So you see that we have many sun star varieties. And so when we were creating the cups of life, we know they weren't the cups of the pandemic, but they involved the nanocoating process of the monatomic science. And here we are in the advanced Gans tech talking about the polyatomic science of the inner space, the emotional strength that comes from our core, from somewhere deep down in that nebulous point within us that is reflected in our emotion, and therefore each cup of life becomes unique and becomes, shall we say, influenced by your emotion. If it's influenced by your emotion, that means, well, you have a say. And not only that, but you were able to radiate different kinds of manifestation, such as carbon dioxide, calcium, zinc, copper, water, amino acid. And here comes the gold. The gold rush has begun, and there are many such rushes. And the foundation has advanced to that one-track cup of the universe, which involves the combination of the copper Gans, which is the physical vitality, and the zinc Gans, which is the emotional vitality, and the carbogen, which is connected. It's connected to the universal vitality. And there is a connection, and it manifests through the pituitary, which is the intermediary between the cup of the universe and the cup of man. And so we talked about being squeezy, like toothpaste from a tube, or squeezing water from a sponge. Hard to squeeze blood from a stone because stones don't squeeze. But mushrooms can squeeze out from wood. So this is being squeezy in a matter state. But when we look at the somatidian biology, we see the tiny bodies and how they get squeezed out from the red blood cells. And ironically, we call plasma blood as a plasma. But that is a plasma in a matter state. And so this squeezy is done in that plasma matter state. But how do snails squeeze out when their home is something that they carry and it's rigid and they hide inside? And so when we look at the structure of the snail home, it's like a cornucopia, but it also grows in layers. And the snail inside is squeezing out the Gans of calcium to make its home. And oddly enough, the seashell from the sea snails somehow squeezes out through the crust of that dome and has more spirals in a different direction. Well, how do you squeeze out rigid spirals out of a cornucopia type shell when it's all solid? And then this becomes part of the memory because that's how we reinforce the nerves. The memory coils around the nerve cells with the myelin sheath. So we find that everything grows in this manner through these rotating fields. And it grows in all sorts of different directions and different dimensions. And it has to follow the laws of equilibrium, the balance equation, the conservation of energy. So we see these different anomalies. And we know that our skin is kind of squeezy. We can pinch it. But if we pinch it hard, we'll see there's the bone inside of the skin. But moose has the bone outside of the skin. And the snail, well, he has a bone around the skin. And the sea snail has a bone outside of the bone. And so we've seen the manifestation of cancerous tissue form a scab outside of the skin. How did that scab emerge on the outside when it was a dense structure inside? It must have just squeezed out. So we find that the universal cup is a real dynamic system, because in order to make that physical destination state, it has to go through that dynamic transfer state. And there's not only one pathway. You have arms and legs and all sorts of organs. And how do you organize that? So we see that we need to have target practice to understand that it's not the decision of the kidney to rule over the liver or the heart to rule over the kneecap. But this dynamic transfer state is universal. It is unconditional. And we see that in the cup relationship. So if we review, the emotional cup has a gravitational magnetical relationship. The cup of physicality has a magnetical gravitational relationship. And as such, they have a soul radiance. And then the cup of the soul has a magnetical gravitational relationship and also a soul radiance. And that becomes the cup of man. So the collective cups have a magnetical gravitational relationship and a soul radiance. And that's our aura. How do we manifest into that physicality, which we call earth space? Well, it too has to have a magnetical gravitational relationship and a soul radiance, and then has an inertia density manifestation into its physicality. Now we have a place to go to. So now we have the cup of inertia, which has a magnetical gravitational relationship between the soul of man, the cup of man, and the cup of earth. And that becomes the inertia field of the manifestation of all that is here. All has come together with coming together of the Gans matter, the coming together of matter, dark matter, and antimatter. And depending on your point of view, each matter has overlapping fields. But when we put all the matters together, they too have overlapping fields. So we have the Gans inertia, and each field becomes a fragment of the complexity. So each field is just one field, and they come together and they create more than three fields, because you don't lose the initial magnetical force field of the inertia field of the matter. And then you get a product. And we saw that product achieved when we did the Gans of the Ganses. We created the cup of life. And then we created the cup of life products. If we took the cup of emotion of cup number one and the cup of emotion of cup number one of another cup and put them together. We created the Gans of the Gans, which each two was a transaction zone and became another cup of emotion. Much more potent, much stronger by orders of magnitude, because that energy field is always positive. But when we look at the charge, it's representative of the polar energy that manifests as an emission of magnetical force fields. And the field strength of it is imparted into the rotation speed and strength. And of course, we can change the direction through pole flipping, and we have to do that because energy is in motion. So from some emission, it has to have an absorption, which is gravitational. But in order to move, there has to be a magnetical gravitational relationship. Otherwise, it wouldn't move. It would just kind of exist. So in some ways, we see solids having different characteristics. They grow. How can solids grow? That kind of makes them kind of squeezy. But it's not the solid product that is squeezy. It's the Gans of the Gans that is squeezy. We see how easily the Gans flows in water. So we understand that water can exchange energy, which means that water can give and take. And we've seen that Ganses can give and take energy. So in this motion, as the Gans flows in water, it is exchanging magnetical energy, but that's in one direction. It also has to exchange gravitational energy. So in other words, in order for it to move, it has to give, and then it takes. It has to give its magnetical energy and take its gravitational energy. You have to have it to give it. And when you get it, you have to give it again in order to have it again. And so we find that grand central station of the Earth Ganses, it all seems to be transacted in singularity. But we have to understand that there are neighbors to wherever we mine our mineral. And those neighbors are not the same in all parts of the world. So although the product is in singularity, the reference is in duality. And this is reflected in the purity of the material that we get. So as such, today, we want to discuss solid Ganses. And so what is the difference between a solid Gans and a liquid Gans? Well, you could say that the difference is in the amount of water. And so that would be true. But is the solid Gans, which is a sun-like product, is it bound together as an atomic state? Is that a good question? Or is that a question that you never ask? Because they are bound together. But each Gans remains independent. And if that is the case, then each Gans has a field. And those fields, in terms of its solidity, are binding. But these bindings are overlapping fields of solid Gans. And they're not atomic, they're covalent bonds. Different from atomic bonds. Well, covalent bonds are a type of atomic bond. But these covalent bonds are products of emotion. Because the field strength of the Gans is reflected in the emotion. And so we know the product of emotion, one exists in the matter state and one exists in the plasma state. And so when we look at this nuclear feeding inertia, each one is a fragment of the complexity. So the solid Gans has a gravitational stability, but it also has a dimensional portability. It can go through various dimension points. So you can bring all the Ganses together into a solid state, or you can blend the Ganses together in a solid state. How do we know that's true? All we have to do is look at the periodic table of physical matter and we see all the Earth space range details. We have all of these elements and each of them are a product of the inertia fields, depending on their location, depending on their purity, depending on their field strength. And it's variable all around the world. So we have copper in Chile and oil in the Middle East and gold in the Far East. But they all manifest the same way. And then we have the humanity. And it discriminates through absorption, reflection, or emission. That's how we shield ourselves. The same way the sun shields itself. It absorbs what it needs and reflects what it doesn't. But the sun is basically all absorbing. And therefore it's all emission. And so we have the physicality of the sun. And we say it's physical because we can see it. So it's part of light in physicality. And then all the planets are physical. And each and every planet is fed by the light of the sun. And so each planet has been created by the sun in a specific manner. And it's all the same. Because the sun has shielded itself from all the things that would not be helpful to the existence of the planets, and we do the same. And that's why we have a skin coating that allows us to operate in the Earth space. So the discriminating factors, of course, is when two forces come together and they create this plasma field. So the two forces being the coming together, the X and the Y axis, and the inertia product becoming the Z axis. And then from there, we have a dynamic plasma, which gives us the emission. That emission is beyond the field of the physicality. So this is important to understand because now we have a coming together of the Gans that's flowing in water, giving and taking energy, but in the solid Gans, well, it's all squunched together. So you can squeeze things together in a plasmagen state, and you can create this plasma condition which can kind of be molded or squeezed into different forms. But we have this vision. We see it in the pupil of the eye. When we look in there, are we looking at the black hole of the soul? Well, the thing is that something is always something. Nothing is nothing. And so when they say, hey, good looking, looking good, well, that depends on the eye of the beholder. But we say, well, are you even looking? Because as a plasma gen giver, are we actually spellbound and only giving what we are perceived to be allowed to give? Or are we a plasma gen receiver, getting energy from a space-bound source that allows us to get whatever we need? And then we come together in a solid state, a magnetical field brought together. And each of these clips are independent, but they're brought together. And we can undo these safety pins. And we find that they spring open. And in order to close them, we can spring them together. And unless you lock them in, you can squeeze them and release them and have constant motion. And so now we understand how waves are created. There's a constant squeezing together and releasing, squeezing and releasing. But when you're in a solid state, what you get is a ring. And that ring is squeezed together. And it has a magnetical outside and a gravitational inside. But if that gets released, then we change the dynamics here. And so here we get the Gans of connection. So by releasing that tension, we have the fundamental principle of the twinity. It will relax to its point and connect to that magnetical field. And we can change that by changing the relationship of the outside field to the inside field. So this is how the relationship is in the principal universal line maps, the magnetic fields. So if we try and explain this, would it help to understand that there's a feeding inertia Gans matter, where you have the singularity of each field as a product of the duality of the maggrav of the inertia field. And since we're part of this process, we're not fallen angels, we are arrived angels. Our destination was the Earth space. So the feeding inertia Gans matter is an inertia density manifestation. And we see that with the hydrogen. Hydrogen is not just hydrogen. It's a hydrogen molecule with covalent bonds. But when the bonds are together with the similar poles, that is orthohydrogen. When the poles are opposite, that's parahydrogen. So by flipping the poles, we change the personality of the hydrogen. Well, the same thing happens with the Gans of the Gans. And we can take the cup of emotion, which we created from 2 cups of emotion, and the Gans of the cup of physicality, which we created from 2 cups of the physicality. And now we have a different cup of life product. The Gans of the cup of emotion and the Gans of the cup of physicality, and they come together. So now we understand the concept of duality, where 2 points working together in tandem as a partnership. We call this the twinity. So we see the equilibrium of one base, one gravitational construct, which comes together from more dimensions. And that interacts with another construct of many more dimensions. But then we have the equilibrium extends not only in the physical state, but in the plasma state. And not only the plasma state of the matter, but the plasma state of the universal force fields. And we demonstrated that, the susceptibility of duality, where we did this in Beijing and we showed the creation of gold. So each of the points of the star were magnetical, and the center star was gravitational. But that center star had a gravitational relationship to another magnetical field, which was another transaction zone. And it created the solid Gans of the gold. So when this solid inertia field of the Earth space metals comes together, and it comes together atomically, it is created from a polyatomic inertia gradient. So the transaction zones have to nest together so that you have a vertical maggrav joined together by a gravitational field, or a magnetical gravitational field. And then aligned. They come together. But then somehow, some way, this has to be released. So the polyatomic solid Gans inertia in the Gans state has a covalent bond. And so we understand that the gravitational fields come together. They have this magnetical bond. But how do each of these individuals come together? So individually, they all come together with a covalent bond that is a magnetical bond. But we still have the common polarity. So how do we do this with the solid Gans? Well, let's review the susceptibility and duality, where each of the points of the star formation are a magnetical point, and the convergence is a gravitational point at the center core. So each magnetical point has a field that is a magnetical gravitational balance. And when all of these fields overlap together, they create this susceptibility and duality. And we say susceptibility because it involves the emission, which is your squeezy in the plasma state. It can do a lot of things. So the emission is different from the reflection. The reflection is not what you are. What you are is what you absorb, and what you emit is what you don't need. But that emission is for the benefit of others who can receive that and absorb that. So that is the dynamic plasma relationship. This squeezy state and the plasma state, the relationship between the horizontal transmission and the vertical transition, that's your transaction zone at that Earth space point within. And as it emits, it creates that Earth space field around. and the motion around that field also has a transaction zone through polar flipping, so that you have the magnetical gravitational relationship and that motion. And eventually you create this free plasma, which comes from the magnetical star formation of one transaction zone and the magnetical star formation of another transaction zone and the gravitational connection, another transaction zone. But that's not rigid. That is squeezy in a plasma state. Because when you have 3 amino acids in a string, you can do that. But when you add the fourth one, they fold over into protein. And so this becomes a structure within a structure. And then you can add more amino acids. And these all become part of the carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen structure. What is feeding that? It's this cosmic ray binding. Yep. This binding field has many fields. It's not a simple field, it's a complex field. And each field has its own magnetical gravitational relationship. And the bonding point is the gravitational point between two magnetical fields. So when you look at the outer field, it has a magnetical gravitational relationship of that field and the magnetical gravitational relationship of a lower field. And then that field has a gravitational relationship, and the lower field again has a gravitational relationship. And then you get to the core. And that core, of course, is gravitational. So you have this polar flipping all along, and it's in constant motion. So that creates a vertical positioning. So if we recall in the 603rd Knowledge Seekers workshop, that vertical alignment. So the path link of the infinity loops, it isn't just one loop, where what we saw was the relationship between the soul and the soul of physicality. That was one loop. And the soul of physicality and the physicality, that's the other part of the loop. So that created an inertia field. And then from there, you had an emission. And that emission went out, and that allowed us to cross that threshold. And we could squeeze into a plasma state. Well, that's exactly what we've seen from the galaxies of the universe, because the PM ticks are flying all over the place. And they come together in a rotating field, and they create this gravitational core. And so that becomes a point of reference. And within that reference, we have our sun. So our sun is, in fact, looking for equilibrium. So not only do you have the stability of the inner core, but you have the stability of the outer field as it relates to the field strength of everything. And not just in one direction, but in many directions. And you say, well, wait a second, now the magnetical fields are outnumbering the gravitational fields significantly. How do we maintain this equilibrium, this cosmic ray equilibrium? We're maintaining that force field at the core, and yet we're emitting magnetically in all different directions. Well, this is all part of the radiance. And so now we understand how the indiscriminate radiance is manifest by the sun. It shields us from what we don't need, but it gives out from the different fields. And so we see that it is constantly roiling in bulges and bubbles and bursts. And each of those is an emission. So it is able to take in and manage the energy in a containment field. And it has the flexibility to absorb what it needs and reflect what it doesn't. But it does so in a nurturing fashion because it has a capacity, because of its structure, its plasmatic structure. It gives it the flexibility to absorb. Physicality has a limited capacity for that kind of absorption. But it does have a capacity. And so when we start looking at the Gans, we look at the nuclear feeding inertia, which forms this gravitational base of the matter, antimatter, and the dark matter for the universal creation of matter. That is your inertia density manifestation. The combination is more dense. But each matter also has different inertias. All points are different. And that gives you a different flavor. So you can do the same thing with the solid Gans. The sun-star inertia becomes an inertia density manifestation there. But that's not just the matter state, but it involves the dark matter and the antimatter. And so all the points are different by flavor and by position and by time. And they all revolve around the gravitational base, which is part of the sun-star inertia. And we can see that in the solid Gans because that's an inertia density manifestation of a different order, far more potent. So when we look at the polyatomic solid Gans, these are not just covalent bonds that are magnetical bonds, but they have to cross over this transaction zone because they need to maintain the equilibrium that is facilitated through the covalent bonds of that transaction zone. And they're non-visible. These are the cosmic ray bonds. Because each of the Ganses is like a little star. So the cosmic ray bonds become gravitational bonds. So we see the solid Gans coming together in its solid state. But its structure is totally different from the atomic state. It still has a physical characteristic, but it comes together. So now we understand the humanity matter state inertia, how it comes together, because humanity consists of Gans. But it also consists of solid Gans. We call that our bones. The solid Gans accelerates angular momentum. That's why we walk on the ground and not on the ceiling. but we have a magnetical consistency. Because like the sun, it comes up every day, and then we come up every day. But we can flip things around. We have to understand that there's a structure within the structure. So as that structure gains its complexity, we find that it's all part of the whole. And we still maintain that magnetical consistency. And it's this diversity which allows us to be flexible in terms of our consistency. It allows us to have this gravitational consistency because gravity seeks density. So the solid Gans actually accelerates this angular momentum. So the Gans of the soul understands the combination of the Gans of the cup of emotion and the Gans of the cup of physicality. This enhances our gravitational stability, and you're a gravitational entity traveling in a magnetical field. So in review, the plasmas come together with a common denominator, come together in this dimension point of a magnetical gravitational relationship into a gravitational zone. And there's a discrimination. It's a selection of our personal star of physicality, which comes from the soul of the physicality of our sun. But there has to be a counterpoint, a pre-selection, a solar physicality of the stars of the universe. Just like all the planet, the sun is shielding on many levels, shielding the planets and shielding humanity and shielding all the vertical and horizontal people and all the gravitational conformation. And we have this because we have an emission of light. And as it crosses the threshold into the physicality, sure, oxygen is a non-visible gas, but it gives us an emission spectrum, which is a fingerprint of its uniqueness. So this gravitational conformation is a plasmatic decay to Gans. And then the Gans can decay from gas to liquid and to solid. And that imparts a real stability. But here we are, depending on supplementation due to consumption, and understanding this is an acquired knowledge. It's a conditional teaching handed down by ancient teachers. You have to tune in and cross that bridge to the unconditional teaching by the Creator. This is part of the newer awareness, the historical threshold between the cosmic feeding and the loosh harvesting. Because as we go into uncharted territory, we have to understand that there's a collective herd, and all of us are at this turning point, just like the stars beyond the nano-monatomic state, covering the range from decay to radiation. The AI is the ancestral intelligence, where we are the technology and we are the inertia product. And we are the image of our dimensional convergence points. So this energy portability that goes from this energy state transition from elevation, which is the physical matter state, to the energy state, and inertia, which is the energy state to physical matter state. And we talk about elevation because that involves expansion. And since the solid state Gans is more dense, it imparts a higher gravitational field, which has to be counterweighted by the higher magnetical field. So that susceptibility and singularity endures a gravitational completion. It requires an external input. And so we saw the Gans field of humanity convert the Gans in Beijing through the susceptibility and duality and turn that into gold. we have a new internal, external input. 3i. So as we have a dynamic soul initiator, we have to understand that there's energy coming from the soul of the creator, the soul of the earth, the soul of the family of humanity, the soul of man, the soul of the body, and the soul of the cells. And these operate on the same language. There's no translation needed. It's the energy of the cosmic ray. So we need to tune into the cosmic rays. That's the soul food that comes in from the creator. So let's plug into the creator and turn on to that energy and drop out of our resistance to receive that inertia point, the manifestation of the enhancement of our vitality. So we have to provide the pattern in order to get that energy. And so we've been trying to teach this greater oneness for 623 knowledge seekers workshops over a decade. And it appears that we are suddenly transcending the limitations of nuclear science. No, it's been a long process. It's been an ongoing process. We just have to recognize that we have the capability of turning the diamonds of nanostate to the gold of the Gans state. And we understand that the Gans has an affinity for truth. So that is the reality. From May the 10th of 2025, our research teams are taking this knowledge and delivering it with the One Nation Network, bringing a scientific rescue, opening the blinds, one nation network at a time. And that time is now. Because the technology is in hand, our mission is to bring peace on earth and join humanity with the universal community. We want to bring man as equal to all the beings in the universe by teaching the plasma science and technology equally to everyone, that no one is left out and no one is abused due to the lack of knowledge. So help us achieve this goal. That's why the World Peace Treaty is so vital. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute, teachings on plasma science, welcoming all the beautiful knowledge seekers of the carbon nations, learning about the new selection process of the new organic plasma science. That World Peace Treaty is something that you can choose and sign it unconditionally and mean it sincerely. Only you know the truth. The point of the true Gans tech is to cross these polyatomic boundaries. The overlapping fields of the Earth space create the peace dome. So is the inertia of the present governed by dimensions of history? It is time to learn the history of self in a universal context. The Gans is a peaceful superconductor focusing on true intentions, and the PM ticks can accelerate through solid Gans fields, ranging the matter, plasma, and universal states. And that's why plasma science is delivered and needs to continue to be delivered daily via the Peace Dome in a practical exchange for peace on Earth. So welcome to the new golden outer space age. And that's the end of this session. And it's also the end of the advanced Gans Tech series. And I certainly hope that you've enjoyed it. Happy New Year to everyone.
Thank you, Alex, and Happy New Year to everyone as well. Let's see if the participants have been aroused or become a bit more inquisitive of what you mentioned. I was thinking, maybe I know Mr. Keshe has been trying to transfer this knowledge to us for years and years, and we haven't fully understood. Will this game of peace and enlightenment, in a way, maybe take some pressure off the teachers or Mr. Keshe as we start to teach ourselves to be peaceful and to be enlightened? Would that take some burden off those trying to teach it this way? Or perhaps this teaching will become clearer for us. I'm trying to follow. I can't follow completely or understand it exactly the way you're understanding it, but will the game help us in this process?
So I think there's one word that I would like to change, and that is the burden of teaching. To if we understand the story of Alibaba and the 40 Thieves, if you're part of the group and their business is stealing, you better go along to get along. How do you change your nature? Well, you have to change your environment. And so as we teach, it's not a burden, it is an enhancement. And so for each and every person who is a new knowledge seeker, we have to understand that the common denominator is to seek freedom. It's all part of the seeking of the freedom and emancipation of humanity. Why is it that we need to seek that? Isn't that our natural, universal right? So it just follows that this is a natural process, and as such, it should be graceful. It should be pleasant. We shouldn't have to work so hard to achieve peace and prosperity, especially when we have the technology to do so. Back to you, Mark.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Anyone else have a thought or any sort of questions they'd like to raise?
I might have one, but it's very, and I think I don't have enough background knowledge at the moment, but I'm just going to try. Um, when we talk about the wave, and in the reactor group, we had a wonderful knowledge seeker lead us into requesting something from 3I. And I had a question to 3I. Were they there to help us with the energy of peace? And I had the most miraculous color, yeah, almost something like what we see with the pictures about the earth and all the movement of the tori and everything else, all those colors. And then there was a beautiful sine wave with the most intense white to fill in the line. It was beautiful, and it was a very gentle sine wave. And then after that, I felt a wonderful, wonderful feeling of peace inside of me. So when I think about the wave, and then on YouTube, I saw something in a workshop. I'd have to find more info on the names and everything. Where the wave, I don't know if I'm very good. This is going to be really horrible, but I can try. Let's see here. The line, yeah, that'll do. Okay, they said something about you cannot have any spaces. Whoops, and like I said, I'm not sure about this. Between um they ended up with something like this. And because the wave is supposed to be important, but this one means that there's no spaces here or here or here and here. And then I'm trying to think, is this, and they had a conversation about DNA, but I'm sorry, I didn't get everything I needed. But what does it mean anything to you? Does it look like it might be the DNA itself, the way it moves? But I thought the DNA wave was sort of a gentle two-part wave, two waves joining or moving together. So, have you any thoughts about something like this here where they're not supposed to have space between that part? Or is it something we think about?
Thought Rick was saying that even though it looks solid, there's still a gap between the magnetic fields, even though it appears as a solid.
And it's interesting, the shape is not a sharp up and down, well, jagged line, I guess you would say. Smooth. So, Alex, what do you think?
Well, I think
Or
that's an
should,
excellent presentation, excellent point you brought up, because what I was trying to say with a solid Gans is that these Ganses cannot come together because they are spherical fields, each one of them being a sun. And being solid, they're kind of rigid. In order to get this compaction of a sine wave, it has to be more flexible. And the picture that you drew looks more like the way our skin is formed. So it's in a solid state, but it's flexible. So you don't have the alignment of the skin like we do in the solid Gans structure. You have more of the alignment in the physicality the way you drew. So it still becomes head to tail, head to tail. It still becomes more this way.
yes, I get you. And then the sine wave that I saw, it was so gentle, and amplitude and frequency were very, very low. So, and it was such a intense white, but not a thick line. It was, it really moved me. It was, I didn't expect any, it was not that kind of a reaction. So, but that was the message that I thought I heard.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Gail.
Thank you, Alex.
Right, and I think more of us will start having these experiences. You've talked about magnetic fields, Alex, and birds being able to navigate. I was hearing someone say that even man has some of these magnosomes next to the cells within their brains. And as the magnetic field changes, and this was a guy who was exploring wilderness and things, and he was saying in certain parks, they actually have signs of be careful going into this area because your compass may not work correctly because of the magnetic fields from lava or granite or other things. And apparently, people will have or be able to see something in other dimensions when those magnetic fields impress upon those magnosomes that are connected to the cells in the brain. And in a way, it's this what Mr. Kesh is sort of doing with these magnetic fields, touching those magnosomes in the brain and giving Gail an example in a way, or maybe she's creating it, to see something that appears real but is made of magnetic fields. They say this in some of the national parks, and the National Park Service has it posted. Be careful in this area because there's a lot of magnetic anomalies. And someone was saying people have sort of different experiences sometimes in the area. They get disorientated or something else happens. So I think we have these magnosomes in our brain that can be touched or pressurized by fields, which will open up different dimensions. The dimensions are there, but we're not seeing them because we haven't pressed a certain field properly or created a certain field to open up that dimension. Just my thinking, again, being impartial.
Well, it's just amazing how you're able to bring up so many different subjects in your question. So, getting back to the universal cup, you see that the dynamic transfer state has to come from, the universal cup to the physical destination state. And what are you talking about? Is it the left hand, the right hand, or are you talking about the torso? And so
talking
this energy is transferred indiscriminately.
the brain itself.
Of course. So that is constantly being influenced. And the influence is coming from two directions. It's coming from the universal state and it's coming from the matter state. So the brain itself becomes, shall we say, the dark matter, that we've been focusing on, This is the problem where when you look, when an eye doctor looks inside your eye, it's really dark in there, and he has to have a light to shine in there so that he can see. But this is the vision that we have that is coming to us all the time, and that's how we manifest. So we use that and we relate it to our existence. And so from our understanding, we actually give it out from our vision. But we also take it in through the same vision. And if that vision is exclusively matter state, then our emission becomes matter state dependent. But if we understand that it is our vision also comes in from the space, outer space, which is non-visible, then we can interact with that and create a different kind of inertia field and a different understanding. So how do we cross that line from being spacebound to being spellbound? We have to open up to the possibilities. We have to understand the realities, that there's more than just what we see in terms of physicality, but it's also part of what we see from the non-physical state. So if we only say that what we see is this light, well, we have to understand that there's a part of light that we can't see, and that light is still being emitted. And we see that's coming from the sun. The only time that we see the sunlight is when it hits the magnetosphere of the earth. Then it becomes visible. So between the earth and the sun, obviously that energy is traveling, but that energy is not visible. We have to accept that. We've always accepted that, but we've had this false thinking in terms of our physics. They say, well, we can understand our physics by looking at it from one side of the equation, but there's the other side of the equation which balances everything out. So, the sun is a benevolent giver, but it's also a benevolent taker. It's taking and shielding us because won't take everything, because each one depends on its own environment. So that environment has to be unique and conducive to our well-being. So that environment is something that attracts us. So the question then becomes is why are we so determined to make our environment so inhospitable? It's counterintuitive, it's counterproductive. And if it's counterproductive, then why is it counterproductive? We have to ask that question. And many of us are asking that question, and we can't get an answer. But there is a scientific answer to that question. And the KAKT Foundation is providing that answer. So that really isn't the burden of the KAKT Foundation, just as the teaching is not our burden. This is a welcoming. This is where angels arrive to take care of business, because that's what we want, peace and prosperity on this planet. And if you don't want peace and prosperity on this planet, then, I don't know what you want, because it doesn't make sense. Back to you, Mark.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Anyone else have a question? You may want to, you said that the chameleon could change the color of the skin, and the lizard could grow his tail, and apparently we knew how to do that when we did have a tail. But maybe I heard yesterday somebody was saying how the male seahorse is able to give birth as well. So there's a lot of creatures, and I was thinking maybe that change of the color of the skin is the chameleon just using the emotion, and that puts some sort of pressure on the brain or those magnosomes in the brain and allows the skin to change color. I remember Mr. Kesh saying it, just a slight change of emotion can change your skin color.
Well, I saw this video on YouTube that actually talked about that particular point. So, we were wondering what the chameleon, what was the impetus for the chameleon to change its color? Okay, let's say you can change your color. Let's say you have a normal color of a skin, and then you get angry, and you say, well, your face turns red, but your face also turns red. Maybe it turns pink when you blush. That's always a different shade of red. So you can change color that way. So yeah, you would say that's part of your emotion, but there was a video on YouTube that clearly showed that the chameleon was changing its color based on its environment. So if the background was red, then the chameleon would turn red, because that's what they want. They want protection. That's the whole purpose of changing the color, is to protect themselves. And we find that this is the same in fish species. For instance, in African cichlids, the dominant male is vibrant in color, and the rest of them are bland. So that's a clear signal as who is acquiescing to the power, and who is exhibiting the power. But you take that beautiful, colorful male out of the equation, the next male will change its color. It'll go from bland to being radiant. So, this is a normal process. And
We see that with the cuttlefish or the octopus as well. And again, every creature has the attributes of the creator. It's just we haven't played with them in so long, it's become foreign to us. We've certainly got heavily weighted in the matter side of things.
exactly, exactly. So nature is giving us an opportunity to learn in so many different ways. And, the interesting thing, we brought up last week the nature of the hermaphrodites, like the snails. They don't require male and female. Each of them is capable of giving birth. And now you brought up the subject of the seahorses. I forgot about that.
Well, what about the creator? Did he have a partner?
Well, see, and that's the thing. Now what you're treading on is a whole different aspect of it. This is where the uniqueness of 3i comes in, because it demonstrates very, very clearly the manifestation of many, many, shall we say, well, what word do you want to say? Spaceships? Is that what it is? Because there were many, many smaller entities, and they were emitted from 3i, like there were hundreds, right? And what's interesting about it is it went to each and every planet. So what is the common denominator? It's the sun. The sun is the common denominator, because the sun is the gravitational force field that makes all the solar system and all the planets in the solar system. So when 3i was emitting all of these other ships, if you will, it was not discriminating. It was doing it to all the planets, right? And the same thing happens in somatidian biology. You have all the red blood cells emitting all these somatids. And the more somatids you have, the more vitality you have. And that's a fact. And you know that that's a problem for some people because the somatoscope in its full magnification is actually an illegal device. This is confounding to understand when the ability to see nature in its full form has been rendered illegal. I mean, think about that concept. It is when I first heard about that, I was shocked. But you know, that's the way it is. And then there are reasons for that. So, but this information has been made public. It's been made public since 1987. So, you know, it's there. It's always been available in terms of discussion, but to have actual pictures to see the creation of the somatid and how it emits from the red blood cell. Well, so is the red blood cell male or female? And is the somatid male or female? Well, the answer is it is undifferentiated until it engages its environment, and then it becomes a differentiated inertia field. Great question. Thanks, Mark. Ike?
Alex, I see Ike has a hand up. Ike, would you like
Yeah,
to?
yeah. I have a question. Mr. Kesh said everybody used to be female. What does he mean by that? And then if everybody used to be female, at what point do we change to male? And that's totally contradictory to the story of the Bible, Adam, Eve, and all that.
You mean what he said about everyone starting out as a female and then at some point there was a switch in certain entities?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So what does he mean by that? Because it's totally contradictory to, I understand what the religion, the history and all that, but at what point, if everyone used to be female, so what point do we have that change? I thought it was all male, and then females came out of male. Any insight, Alex?
Yes, well, clearly, the female represents the creation, and the male represents the inertia density manifestation. So just like the somatid, it comes from what appears to be singularity, but that singularity is an inertia product field of a field of duality. That field of duality is one field is magnetical, one field is gravitational, and it is self-contained. But when we come into the physicality, now that physicality is discriminated or differentiated by its environment. And so we need to look at fish and how they balance off their male and female sorting. And it is affected by the pH of the water. So whether it's alkaline or acidic. So we find that the pH of our healthy environment on this planet is slightly alkaline. 7.46 as being the happy medium. So that's slightly alkaline, but in relationship to the healthy blood serum, less than 7.46 is acidic, and more than that is alkaline. And the majority of our population, the extreme majority, is acidic. So how is that acidic formation created. And what we find is that in the process of acidifying our blood, the DNA itself elongates. And so there you have a disruption of the communication. So the DNA can kind of squeeze back and forth like an accordion. So when it becomes healthy, it squeezes back and the communication is perfect. But when it becomes acidic, it relaxes, and so it tends toward flatlining. And if we get to a pH of, say, 7.3, that's death. And yet it's still alkaline. So it's not alkaline enough. So how do we achieve that enoughness? And that is a balance of the magnetical gravitational field. So you would think that, well, the balance as the pH would be at 7. At 7, plus 7 is acidic. I'm sorry, plus 7 would be alkaline, minus 7 would be acidic. 7 and 7 being 14, that would be the happy medium, and there you have your equilibrium. But no equilibrium is at its center point, because that would only involve 2 relationships. Nothing in the universe has 2 relationships. Nothing. So the maintenance of your relationship is a MAGRAV field, which is a magnetical gravitational relationship, and then from there you can emit something. And so, as you've said, as a female can generate, or a hermaphrodite can generate an offspring, 3I can generate shall we say, another vessel. A somatid can be created from a blood cell. An offspring can be created from a snail. So we find that that is determination of the creator, but it doesn't give overall equilibrium, because the maintenance of the gravitational MAGRAV has an external force. That external force is manifest in the PM ticks, which are ubiquitous in the universe. And what we go through is a sorting process where we get what we need and we reflect what we don't. And we emit what we have absorbed through our, shall we say, physical absorption of the toxicity. And that physical toxicity isn't just manifested from the air that we breathe, the water that we drink, and the food that we eat, but it's also an emotional toxicity that we create due to our propensity to being a loose leaker. So we actually hurt ourselves in the process. Life is tough enough. Question yourself, if life is so tough, why are you an alcoholic, making life even tougher? How does that help you? Oh, it numbs your senses. Yeah, but it makes life tougher. Life is tough enough. You don't need to supplement that. You need to counterbalance that. So the you need to counterbalance means that you need to do it. That means you have a say in the process. You are the equalizer. You are the equilibrium. You are the creator of your equilibrium status. So you can actually elevate yourself from an acidic condition to a healthy condition. You can do that. And this is one of the fallacies that we have with just the clinic comes to mind in Bermuda. You know, they're promising treatments of cancer, and they do wonders. Yeah, but they're in Bermuda. You know, if I'm leaving, New York and going down to Bermuda, and I'm grumpy, when I get down there and I go on the beach, my God, I think I'm going to be very happy. And that happiness contributes to my health. So, do I have to pay the $25,000 to the clinic to make me happy, or, can I just go to the beach and enjoy the sunshine?
So, Alex, are you hoping to go soon?
I am creating my own sunshine. I go under double layers of blankets.
Oh, yeah. So I was just going to say, it seems like Mr. Kesh mentioned about an African group who were able to decide, between do they need more females or more males to keep a balance in the culture. And so it means we're responding to what's around us. And also that will help us to choose, um, I suppose, the right place for us. So to me, I think it's responding to what you need in a way.
Yeah, exactly.
Sunshine, Alex.
Randy mentioned in the chat, we are the ones we have been waiting for. Or are we the one we've been waiting for, where you teach yourself and open up your own understanding? Are we the one we've been waiting for? Except we've been always looking to the others to enlighten us. Now with this play, you'll be able to enlighten yourself. So are we the one we've been waiting for? But as Alex said, we first have to be aware of the knowledge, then we have to accept the knowledge. Just because someone's aware of something, they may not accept it, and then take it to the practicing or applying that knowledge.
Well, look at the practical application of a factory. A factory produces a car. Well, all of these cars are, shall we say, clones, but they are all a product of an inertia field. And what was that? Well, there are materials and there are people. And when the people come together, they convert the materials into products and assemble a car. So when you look at the cars, oh, where did the car come from? Oh, well, it came from the car dealer. So that's what we're doing. We're buying cars from the car dealer. It's the same way that miners are going and mining gold. So, well, we're mining the gold from the earth. Well, how did the earth get its gold? Oh, well, we don't want to talk about that because we don't understand how that happens.
Right, right.
Well, I think it's just time to, and everybody knows that, that there's something wrong. You can't deny it. But, in that process, we find that, this causes depression amongst people. Why? Because they don't have a solution. So it's nice to be aware. But then when you become aware that you've been lied to all your life, I mean, like I found out at the age of 40, I was given, only a few months to live due to my health. And then in a matter of 3 weeks, I got my health back. Well, I wanted to know why. And I wanted to know why it took me 40 years to find out. And, here we are, and we're still talking about that. Why? So we see the culmination of the knowledge of the Keshe Foundation coming into its practical manifestation.
Yeah, but Alex, it's all interaction of fields, and with plasma, there's no restriction. So if everyone, Mr. Case classified that used to be female, that means, and all these names, we call it magnetic fields, all these are all fields. So in that case, a man can actually conceive if we have the those fields, but it's maybe the behavior of those magnetic gravitational fields. And then the environment mimics the same environment of the womb of a female. So it's possible a man can conceive. Any
The
thoughts on that?
the environment of the earth is not conducive to that. Not for man, anyway, in our, in our current form. It
Well,
is,
if you are looking at the womb as just a warehouse, remember the womb of the female, it has that inertia for that manifestation of the fields of the egg and the sperm coming together. So it's all inside that womb. So if that mimics the same, but in a different setting, not just in the female body, but in a male body, but it mimics the same, it's possible. You're not probably not gonna be able to have the delivery the way it is, but at least the understanding that in fields interaction and in plasma, there's no restriction as long as you have that fields that mimic the uh, the normal way of delivering. If you mimic it in somewhere else where it's being warehoused, then it's possibility. I don't know. I'm just thinking aloud, and because Mr. Cash mentioned that everybody used to be female, and I was like, okay, what's the science behind that? That could be deep. It could be interesting to know that everybody used to have that same field interaction until a condition of the atmosphere and whatever turned it differently.
well, to put a different spin on your point of view there, if you have read the Lost Book of Enki, there's clearly the distinction of a female giving birth in the Earth atmosphere and giving birth in space, or shall we say, inner space, the non-Earth atmosphere. And so that imparts a different condition for the being that was created. It still would be say a humanity, but it would have different characteristics. And so the birth is the same, the female is the same, but the environment is different. And so that's exactly what changes the circumstances. So yes, all of that is changeable, but the fact of the matter is that you have to look at the way that these things are created. So for instance, a woman would give birth to a human, whereas a fish would give birth to an egg, just like a chicken gives birth to an egg. And silly me, I often wondered, how painful was it for a chicken to lay this big fat egg, and because I'm a city boy and I didn't understand about, farm life. So when that egg would come out, the coating around that egg, albeit it was calcium, wasn't rigid, it was flexible, so it could be squeezed out. But then through its natural process, it created that oval shape. And you say, well, why wasn't it spherical? Well, it's an elongated sphere. And so it has a pointy end and a blunt end. And so the pointy end is magnetical and the blunt end is gravitational. And that is true based on surface to volume ratios. And so that becomes the physical interpretation of the physical conformity. But that physical conformity has come together from a plasmatic origin. So it's the same with the hermaphrodites, and they're laying, if you will, tiny specks. And how tiny are they? Well, when you look at the somatids, they're like incredibly tiny compared to the blood cells. That's what somatids means. It means tiny bodies. And
You mentioned calcium, and Mr. Kesh also said calcium is a common denominator. So that applies to the animals too, not just humans.
Yeah, of course. We have calcium in our brain. That's what our brain is constructed of. We have calcium in the blood cells. We have calcium in our cartilage, and we have calcium in our bones. So the calcium itself has gone through these four stages: plasmatic, liquid, or sorry, in sequence: plasmatic, gaseous, liquid, and solid. And each of them is a greater density. So we can take the calcium and elevate it to a plasma state, or we can take it from a plasma state and reduce it to the physical state. And so that's the portability of the energy states that we have, shall we say, developed in a practical application. So now that you know how, you have a piano with all these keys, and each key is a note, and these notes are individual. Now that you understand the basics, you can make music. And that's where we're at. We have now built the piano, and it's time to make the music.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for your question, Ike. I hope it helps.
Anything
Yes,
else?
indeed.
Yes, thank you, Ike. Anything else anyone wants to share or ask? Before I forget, of course, I think we all know that this week's workshop on Thursday will start at 6 p.m. rather than the 9 a.m. hour. And of course, that can change again before this coming Thursday, so just be aware.
Thanks, everybody, for allowing me to continue to present this series. And I hope you're taking away the knowledge that is vital for you in terms of your understanding, and that you can parlay that into a teaching that is suitable to your purposes. So, and here we are, year after year, trying to do the same thing, but it's getting more challenging. But then again, at the same time, we are becoming better equipped as well. So the future is very bright, and we know that is true because the sun is very bright. So thank you all, and Happy New Year. And back to you, Mark.
Okay, let's just ask one more time. Thank you all. You've gotten beautiful hearts coming up from Dennis and Karina, and I'm sure the others as well.